Fear may be the essence of Halloween on an emotional level, and the feeling we're kind of pursuing when we go to haunted houses or watch horror movies and shows. But anger is probably our species' scariest emotion. One reason is because it reveals how thin the line is between protector and predator in relationships. This is especially true for different identities in conflict or in the context of power, and who has more power and who has less in any dynamic. When we witness rage, whether in others or ourselves, it means different things to different people. Now, especially as a man, I and we might do well to reflect on our own potential for harm, because anger as an instinct always feels urgent. It always feels true. And then when it passes and that fog lifts, well, you may see the situation differently, but you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. And then reflect not just as individuals, but as groups or sets of people and the scope or impact of our collective anger. Of course, this makes anger culturally and politically charged. Some societies, ideologies, systems glorify anger as strength. Others repress it entirely as taboo, or only stigmatize it when it's expressed by certain groups. We could also understand some types of anger as the haunting of the heart, which invites you to explore how unacknowledged emotion becomes the ghost that won't rest until it's seen and understood. This is a recurring theme in therapy. Circling back to scary movies for a minute, in the 1979 horror classic, When a Stranger Calls, a teenage babysitter keeps receiving increasingly terrifying calls from a stranger. The tension escalates and peaks as she realizes the calls are coming from inside the house, leading to a life or death struggle with an anonymous madman. And then that same intro was resurrected in the Scream series in the 1990s, my generation's slasher zeitgeist, because I was in high school when it came out. And that launches with Drew Barrymore also receiving a call from a killer, either in the house or in close proximity. Maybe there was cell phones finally at that time. But I want to highlight the notion of an inside call because of my study of archetypal psychology. So another interesting way to engage with the energy of intense anger is as the monster within, calling from the subconscious or unconscious, like the part of like the basement or the attic of our psyche or in our mind body house. Anger throughout art and literature has been personified or externalized as a monster. And it freaks out some folks, not just as an outside threat or foreign threat, but because it's a familiar inner beast. The great classic predecessor horror stories were like 1800s vignettes of Robert Louis Stevenson's Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. The protagonist is both Jekyll and Hyde, a doctor who invents and drinks a potion that separates his good and evil sides and allows him to act out all his evil urges and dark fantasies at night and then remain a respected doctor by day. I think the potion is really like a Jungian truth serum, whereas shadow side, which is truly a part of his personality, takes the reins because he has repressed or denied or ignored that part of his psyche in order to present in public and appear as good in front of others. But what did Carl Jung famously say? I'd rather be whole than good. And Mark Twain once wrote that every man is like the moon because they only show the light side and conceal their dark side. So both good and evil exist within Dr. Jekyll. And at first, Mr. Hyde is his voluntary alter ego, but then that side becomes involuntary. Another classic of that era is Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Frankenstein's creature isn't born evil. I mean, he's not even born at all, but manufactured in a laboratory, which is an eerie premise given that we're on the verge of advanced artificial intelligence and a world where we engage with all kinds of bots and other digital entities that were never born. How prophetic, actually. Anyways, Frankenstein, the monster, is not born evil, but becomes dangerous through rejection. And this is an archetypal wound of abandonment. In my counseling work, we often trace a patient or client's rage to the trauma of neglect and how anger in the form of suspicion and jealousy in relationships is a trauma response. There's also a collective element when entire groups are ignored or excluded or left behind. But the other powerful thing that comes up in clinical social work is how different individuals can have the same emotion of anger, but for some, it comes with the pretext of danger because of their physical size or the pitch or tone of their voice, or if they belong to an ethnicity that has a threatening stereotype. Keep in mind, and again, this is as true now as when the author Aldous Huxley said it, the purpose of propaganda is to make one set of people forget that other sets of people are human. And so, how can this be achieved? By highlighting or manufacturing stories of violence and focusing on risk as inherent to the demonized group. And by dehumanizing the other group as foreign and dangerous and conflating their anger with evil, then it gives cover for excessive use of force and expensive policies and corporate operations in the name of safety. It's a pretty simple system, really. Billionaires pay millionaires to convince folks making 50,000 and less that those with nothing at all and no political power at all are the biggest threats and the biggest source of society's problems. They are then categorized as violent and dangerous. And therefore, any expression of anger from them only serves as proof of their inherent evil. And then that's why it's not what it looks like. Don't trust your own eyes. Believe in what you don't see. And even farther back into mythology, there's the Wolfman story, where again, the same man turns into a beast, but only on the full moon. So you see, the moon is a running symbol for the mind and its different states or phases of consciousness and unconsciousness. Hence, words like lunatic, luna means moon, lunatic as a pejorative for someone who is thought to be out of their mind. But the full moon in wisdom traditions represents, like in archetypal psychology or Jungian analysis, it represents bringing more light of attention and awareness and realization than usual to the dark side of our psyche, symbolized by the actual nighttime in these stories. In the case of the Buddha, he reaches enlightenment on the full moon, which he was also born on the full moon in May, enlightened on the full moon in May, and dies on the full moon in May, Buddha Purnima. But all these are allegories for the human struggle with repressed emotion and moral duality. This lens can be applied to our latest blend of religion and politics in society. There's a timely quote from a leading religious scholar, Karen Armstrong, which is, religious people often prefer to be right rather than compassionate. Often they don't want to give up their egotism. They want their religion to endorse their ego, their identity. And her words point to how easily the sacred fire of conscience can be co opted by institutions What begins as moral clarity can quickly harden into moral pride. And the impulse to defend truth with a capital T turns into the desire to be seen as its defender. The point here is that anger, when denied or moralized out of social existence, doesn't just vanish or heal up, it mutates in the darkness of suppression. Halloween can serve as a therapeutic ritual acknowledgement that our inner demons can't be exorcised. Instead, they need awareness and integration. There's a neuropsychologist, Dr. Mario Martinez, who has influenced my counseling work, and he offers a biological parallel to the spiritual insight. He notes that righteous anger is a distinct aura or subset of anger born from compassion and dignity. And it strengthens the immune system and adds vitality to the body. It activates the nervous system, but briefly, and I guess you could say cleanly, as though sharpening one's moral blade without rusting it. And that's important because we always hear nowadays that anger is bad for your health. But I wonder if that's also purposefully misleading because it's only partly true. So there's righteous anger, and then there's self righteous anger, which is what corrodes from within. Self righteous anger is fueled by insecurity and judgment, and it does flood the body with stress hormones and inflammation. So one fire illuminates, the other consumes. You can think of this like the sacred fire of ritual and the wildfire of ego. Righteous anger often coexists with sadness or love for humanity, whereas self-righteous anger originates more from ego protection and moral superiority or group identity. A simple question to ask: does this anger expand or contract my heart? Or in Buddhist psychology, anger plus wisdom cuts through delusion. Anger minus wisdom is delusion. Dr. Martinez has what he calls the biocognitive model or biocognition. And it proposes that our thoughts and emotions are not isolated mental events. They are cultural biological loops that affect our immune system, our nervous system, and our endocrine systems. Coming back to immunity, according to Dr. Gabor Mate, anger is also part of the immune system at the social and emotional level. Like how white blood cells identify and remove pathogens or toxic substances that have entered the body, anger identifies and tries to push back intrusions on our boundaries or personal space or moral boundaries. But when our anger is rendered useless because, for example, like in child abuse, that can contribute to depression and maybe even autoimmune disease, where the defenses go after the wrong thing and hurt oneself as a form of learned helplessness, or in the way self injury gives some semblance of control. And its onset often begins in dysfunctional circumstances where the autonomy of the individual or adolescent is suppressed. Also, think about this: women are more prone to autoimmune disease than men. What might that say about anger and culture? Could it be more than genetics? Could there be a cultural theme? Again, Dr. Martinez said that he found a correlation between thyroid disease, the thyroid gland is in the throat, and patients reporting that they don't feel heard in their families. And this isn't meant to undermine real, inherently medical or predominantly or primarily medical issues like with cellular origins only. But I mean, come on, you can't deny that Our every thought instantly transforms our organic chemistry. Health is multidimensional and multi-directional. The last thing I want to share is how anger is not just its own thing, but is intimately and inseparably linked with its apparent opposites, which I would call the Tao of anger. I got curious working with children this year. Why does anger and aggression come up so much in their play therapy? Well, oftentimes the child is working out suppressed feelings, but they're often locked up by the parent or caregiver, maybe through physical or psychological abuse. But in general, the anger of a child is often seen in terms of conduct and misconduct. And so that emotion is often denied children and sometimes violently. Whereas adult anger commands obedience, child anger provokes punishment. And if we teach children that their anger is always inappropriate, we train them to internalize helplessness, and we perpetuate cycles of suppressed emotion that erupt later as full on rebellion or toxic shame. So I try to examine anger in the matrix of power. In the abstract, yes, anger is universal, a normal human response to boundary violations or injustice. But in reality, society doesn't permit all bodies to express anger equally. The emotion itself becomes entangled with power. Whose anger is legit, whose is pathologized, whose is feared, and whose is ignored, or whose is extinguished. There are unlimited dialectics of power, but some obvious ones are like the adult and the child. The the power that comes with age, or men and women. You know, a man's anger has often been coded as authority. Social psychology studies show that it's more likely to be interpreted as leadership. Yet it also traps men when male anger becomes both privilege and prison if they cut off their circulation with other emotional sensibilities that they have internalized as vulnerable. You know, like sadness, hurt. A big one now is loneliness. It's widespread, the male loneliness epidemic and loneliness in general, but no one talks about it because somehow it's seen culturally as failure. There was a study, I think, by Daniel Kahneman, famous social psychologist and economist, of men and women being assertive in professional offices. And the researchers had male and female associates delivering the exact same, I guess you could say, angry messages and the exact same words in two different offices. But when the man says it, afterwards, all the employees who were listening, who were present, are interviewed. And these employees, no matter what their identity or gender is, were more likely to perceive the man's words as assertive. Whereas when a woman was saying the exact same thing, the employees are interpreting it as disruptive or oppositional. So a woman's anger has historically been more likely to be delegitimized. Things have changed a lot this century. And I should note that it comes up a lot for me in my work where mothers of boys and partners of men complain not about their anger, but the total lack of emotional expression. You know, certain generations of men and boys are impacted more by this, like they're caught between worlds. An old one where they've learned they should deny the so-called softer feelings stereotypically, and this new one where literally or implicitly they've learned that all anger is destructive, or toxic masculinity, so they shut down. And you can look at anger with race, with ethnicity, with stereotypes of anger and danger. During the American slave era, there were comprehensive campaigns and even research dedicated to construct stereotypes and convince the majority of the population to not get in the way of the human trafficking of African people, because they try to pathologize and dehumanize to justify this evil and exploitation to the rest of society by suggesting that these people would be dangerous. These people that they are dehumanizing as so different. And when we trace these patterns today together, anger becomes a diagnostic tool for social inequality. Who gets to be angry and at what cost? It all tells us something about where power lies. The same neurochemical surge can sanctify or stigmatize depending on the body that's feeling it. So, to navigate this as a clinician, I have to learn how to distinguish between the biology of anger and the politics of anger. The first is universal, cortisol, adrenaline, increased heart rate, fire, as in body temperature. And the second is cultural, shaped by history and hierarchies and families and who they've allowed to feel and express what, and who must smolder in silence, so to speak. So the work then, as I see it, is twofold: humanizing the anger in the historically marginalized and humbling anger in the historically privileged or advantaged. And then we can help anger reclaim its necessary role as the pulse of dignity and not just the weapon of control. In psychology, you hear that anger is a secondary emotion. Why? Because it protects primary feelings like confusion. In Alzheimer's, you see a patient becoming angry even with their loved one. Is it really anger, or is it anger after confusion and then fear, hurt, embarrassment, or loneliness again? Maybe easier for different identities to say, screw you or I hate you, because they don't feel able to say I'm hurt or I'm sad or I'm lonely. But in the Tao of anger, it's not simply the second emotion in a linear fashion. Consider these possibilities. Anger is the heat of fear. Fear is the cold of anger, not as in the actual temperature of the body, but as the yin yang of expansion. Anger sends someone out to the threat. And contraction, yin, the fear, which is anger retreating. Or for men, especially, consider when anger is active sadness, or when sadness is passive anger, like thunder or rain, or emphasizing the yin yang of the active and passive, the positive and negative, and how the seed of both are present, even when one side is manifesting more than the other. Or notice if and when anger is courage without patience, or when patience is anger without courage. Finally, depression as anger turned inward, or anger as depression turned outward.